One of the questions was, somebody asked, are there different social profiles among people with ASD level 1? And generally speaking, I would say yes. There is the person that we would just say he has or she has limited social motivation. So this is the person that finds objects, facts, figures, ideas, non-social, non-emotional tasks very interesting, much more interesting than people. And so the person that gets lost in engineering, computer programming, and other things for extended periods of time, and can hyper-focus on that for extended periods of time, has limited social motivation. I'm not saying that he or she is antisocial. So, hope that answers that question. The second type of individual is socially motivated, but they have difficulty reading social cues. So they tend to miss facial cues, body language, tone of voice, and so on. So they are very social, and they freely dive into social conversations and whatnot, but they're a bit clumsy, and they're kind of unaware of how they're interacting with others. But they push forward anyway. And the individual who is a little socially awkward but also socially motivated can come off, can be viewed as being somewhat intrusive or boring or annoying or overbearing. And then we could also say a third and final general type of ASD level 1 individual might be the masker or the social chameleon. So these people, they are socially motivated, and they're aware of the fact that they're missing social cues, that they're not picking up on some of the subtleties that would make them more compatible with neurotypicals. And so they kind of analyze and adapt themselves to fit different situations and to fit in with different groups. They go, okay, well, these people are talking about this and they're behaving this way, and they can zone in and kind of mimic, for lack of a better term, what's going on around them. Can you guys hear me? Okay. Just type yes if you can hear me. Okay. I'm going to assume that you can. Yes, finally got it. Thank you. Thanks, guys. The other question was, and this is a really cool question. So anyway, let me summarize the first thing. The question was, are there different social profiles among people with ASD level 1? So in summary, what I just said, there's ones with limited social motivation. They prefer non-social tasks, objects, things, rather than people. They're not antisocial personality disorder or something like that. You have the person who is very socially motivated, but they lack social awareness and some social skills. And then you have the chameleon, we will say, who can do an analysis and kind of fit in very well. And females on the autism spectrum are much better with that than males. The other cool question was the difference between schizoid personality disorder and ASD level 1. And as some of you may know, there's a huge overlap there. So with the person on the autism spectrum, they may be socially motivated, but they kind of struggle feeling capable in initiating and maintaining friendships. They feel incapable of having discussions outside of their special interest and engaging in group activities where people are talking about idle chit-chat and emotions and whatnot. In contrast, the schizoid personality disorder individual doesn't experience social motivation at all. Okay, so you could think of people with schizoid personality disorder as being affected by differences in social motivation, whereas those with ASD are more affected by differences in social skills or capacity. So, does that make sense? So, the ASD individual is socially motivated, but struggles with social skills. Person with schizoid personality disorder doesn't have any interest in, they prefer solitary activities and isolating. But there's some commonalities, though. Both groups experience emotional intimacy as intrusive, especially when discussions of feelings enters into the picture. Both ASD level 1 and schizoid personality disorder people experience others' emotions as overwhelming, especially negative emotions. Many people with ASD level 1 absorb the negative emotions of those around them. And this can contribute to the ASD individual's desire to withdraw or be alone. Whereas people with schizoid personality disorder are known to have a flat affect and restricted range of motion and are not overwhelmed by others' emotions because they're not engaged emotionally at all. It's very common, although some neurotypical spouses might find this hard to believe, that the ASD individual as a child was very empathic and picked up on others' emotions too easily. And it was just too painful for that child to feel other people's pain. And so that child with ASD, whether he knew he had ASD level 1 or not, learned to choke his emotions off at the neck. So now in adulthood, gets in a marriage situation, and he appears as if he doesn't care about another person's feelings. I would say also that people with ASD level 1 and schizoid personality disorder, both of them tend to crave a lot of alone time. Both may experience difficulties with motivation. For the autistic individual, it's often related to having an interest-based nervous system, we will say. Contrast with that with the person with schizoid personality disorder and the fact that he or she lacks motivation socially has to do with anhedonia and a general tendency to receive less pleasure from social activities. Okay, so the autistic, it's not that he doesn't like to socialize, he prefers to socialize when there's shared interests involved. Person with schizoid personality disorder doesn't derive any pleasure from social interaction. So let's see. I guess we could say that people with schizoid personality disorder experience limited to no pleasure when socializing. And we could also say that autistic people receive little to no pleasure socializing when it comes to small talk. If you have ASD level 1, you can connect very deeply and for a long periods of time when you're talking with someone and they share your interests. Okay, I probably over-answered that question. And then the other cool question that I got that I want to answer is, this one has to do with the similarities and differences between ASD level 1 and narcissistic personality disorder. So there's just like schizoid personality disorder, there's a huge overlap between ASD and NPD. So some of the differences would be a person with ASD has restricted and repetitive behaviors, where the person with narcissistic personality disorder doesn't really engage in restricted or repetitive behaviors. So there's two different things right there. If you have an ASD level 1 spouse, for example, and he seems to be very rigid and loves routine and structure, that's not a narcissist trait. Many people with narcissism and autism are described as lacking empathy. But people with ASD appear to lack empathy or not listen due to challenges with social interactions, especially with nonverbal communication. Whereas people with narcissistic personality disorder, they're too focused on themselves to listen or empathize with others. That's two completely different things. Another one might be that people with NPD are often preoccupied with fantasies, especially concerning themselves, whereas autistic individuals are more likely preoccupied with objects, parts of objects, and their special interests. I would say also that an autistic individual could appear arrogant or egocentric. That's true. But that usually happens because he or she is trying to compensate for challenges that they have socially. Whereas someone with NPD may appear this way because they're unwilling or unable to empathize. They feel superior to others. They take advantage of others. They take advantage of situations to fulfill their own needs. They're very selfish for reasons unlike an ASD level 1 person would appear selfish. Okay, those are the three questions that I wanted to answer. And I thought I'd just do it here in the video instead of doing it piecemeal. I'm looking at the chat. See if there's any questions in here. Let's see. KC Angle 78. My husband attended your most recent masterclass. Thank you. He no longer thinks the problem is just my imagination. Oh, well, that's great. I'm the third. Reading about psychology and body language was always a special interest. I'm a chameleon indeed. I always felt like a chameleon studying people. That's a skill. Sometimes it's a skill that can be overused, but you don't want to just throw that in the trash. Curious about attachment styles related to ASD. Let's cover that in another video. That's going to be another good question to answer. Attachment styles. Yeah, I'll make note of that. NNYLASOR. I wish my husband would be more open to learning as much about himself as I have learned, as well as attempt to understand that empathy can be practiced, but I also don't want him to fake or mask it. Have him join my men's Q&A group, and then once he's completed that, he can move on to the men's masterclass, which KS Angle 78, her husband did that. I'm interested with how ASD overlap with CPTSD as well. That's another great question. We'll do another live on that. So, okay. So we'll wrap up now. I know that was short and sweet. And sorry about the audio earlier. So I think I want to summarize these three questions. I hope this isn't redundant. With respect to the different social profiles among people with ASD, there's the one with limited social motivation. There's the one that is highly motivated, but there's kind of socially awkward. And then there's the social chameleon. The summary for schizoid personality disorder would be both groups have a problem with closeness. They kind of view closeness as intrusion. Both groups, both the ASD level 1 and the schizoid personality disorder, are easily overwhelmed by emotions. They have a high need for low time. They have motivation difficulties, and they have limited social pleasure. So it's easy to mistakenly think that the ASD level 1 individual is also schizoid. And the summary for ASD versus narcissistic personality disorder is the ASD individual has restricted and repetitive behaviors. The narcissist does not. The narcissist and the autistic both look like they lack empathy, but people with ASD supposedly lack empathy because their social skills and emotional intelligence is low. People with NPD lack empathy because they're more focused on themselves. People with NPD are preoccupied with fantasies about themselves. Autistics or not. And an autistic person can appear arrogant, but again, that's because he's trying to compensate for feeling socially inferior, whereas the NPD individual feels socially superior. So that's the big summary of the difference there. All right, guys. Hope I didn't over-explain that. Thank you, and we'll sign off for now. And there's two other great questions buried in the chat over there that I'll talk about in the near future. Thanks, guys. Going to entertain a few questions that I've from members of my channel. One question was why my ASD partner always has to make me wrong whenever we talk about problems. Okay. Well, if I have this disorder called ASD level 1 or high functioning autism, this is a developmental disorder. They call it developmental for a reason. That means my social emotional brain is underdeveloped. So in other words, if I have ASD level 1, my social intelligence and my emotional intelligence is low. In fact, you could think of ASD level 1 as a disorder of social skills. So as a result of having a low functioning social emotional brain, I have this thing called mind blindness and emotions blindness. So in other words, I have a hard time predicting what might be in the mind of, in this case, my NT wife and what she might be thinking and or feeling. So if I have ASD level 1, I truly have no clue what she might be thinking or feeling. Therefore, when she has a perspective or opinion that's different from mine, I can't wrap my brain around her perspective. In fact, her viewpoint may seem very nonsensical to me. So since I am blind to her perspective, I will tend to view her differing opinion as she's disagreeing with me. And then I might have a thinking error based on assuming that she's disagreeing with me. I may have a thinking error that goes along the lines of, because she's disagreeing with me, therefore she's against me. And then that might launch me into another thinking error that because she's against me, I must defend myself and prove that she's wrong and illogical. So if I don't make her wrong, that means I'm wrong. Because in the ASD mind, only one person can be right, and that must be me, since my perspective is the only perception that I can see. Emphasis on the term see. So in other words, since I can't comprehend her thoughts or feelings, her thoughts and feelings are not valid. So long way around the bush to get to the point, which is mind blindness and emotions blindness makes him unable to see your perspective and your feelings, but he sees his logic. And since his logic is the only thing that he can see in the cognitive sense, therefore he thinks that, and since only one person can be right, then he thinks, I'm right. Obviously, you are wrong. Let's see. What else did we have here? Give me just a second, please. I had another one. This one was with respect to, this is from an autistic husband, and he's wanting to know how to be more emotionally reciprocal. Oh, great. That's cool. So I think a good place to start with emotional reciprocity would be reflective listening. Because a lot of the NTYs say, he doesn't listen. He's not present when I'm talking. So reflective listening is kind of a special type of listening that involves paying respectful attention to the content and the feeling expressed, in this case, your NT wife. Reflective listening is hearing and understanding, and then letting her know that she's being heard and understood. So if you wanted to practice reflective listening, I would say, in concert with your NT wife, set aside 10 minutes every day to practice this business of reflective listening, and even have a talk about feelings Even though if you have ASD level 1, you're going to be alexithymic and have difficulty talking about feelings. But here would be the exercise. You're going to spend 10 minutes practicing this reflective listening and talking about feelings, okay? I know that might be out of your comfort zone. You're going to reflect her content and feelings. In other words, you're going to listen, paraphrase back what you heard. Don't parrot back. Paraphrase back what you heard using your words to check for understanding. Don't offer advice. Don't offer your opinion on the matter. Don't offer your opinion about her opinion. Don't defend your point of view. She wants you to hear what she's said through your filter. So there it is. Active listening or reflective listening. You're going to stop what you're doing, look in her direction and nod. You're going to paraphrase back what you think she said. If she goes, no, that's not what I said, that's not what I mean, ask her to repeat using slightly different words, and then you try your paraphrase back again, and you say, okay, well, if I understand you correctly, what you're saying is da-da-da-da-da. So yes, that's what I mean. Okay, that proves understanding. The next thing is the validation piece, which is, okay, I hear you, which was step 1. I understand you, which is step 2, because you said I paraphrased correctly. Third step would be validation. Okay, I hear you, I understand you, and I respect the fact that that's your truth. I'm here to listen, to understand, not to mount a defense. So again, don't offer advice. Don't offer your opinion on the matter. Don't offer your opinion about her opinion. Don't defend your point of view. Don't parrot back. Recognize that validating her emotional experience does not necessarily convey agreement, though. Okay? This whole business of reflective listening does not have to include, okay, I hear you, I understand you, and I validate that that's your truth, and I also agree with you. No, if you don't agree with her, that's fine. So reflective listening has the benefits of, it's going to let your NT wife, you're the ASD husband asking the question, so it's going to let your NT wife know that she's being heard and understood. It gives her feedback on what she said and how it came across. It allows you to check your own accuracy in hearing what she said. And by the paraphrase piece, it avoids the illusion of understanding. A lot of times you thought you understood when you really did not. So that's the reflective listening piece. I hope that helps. And so we had another one here. This is from the NT spouse. We have a hard time solving problems when we want to do a project or anything along the lines of a vacation or house repairs and so on. So, okay. So it might be best to come up with a formalized problem-solving process. And I would put this on paper because the ASD spouse, people with ASD prefer structure. They like to have things very concrete. So I would do this. We'll come up with some steps to do a problem-solving process, but I would write this down because your ASD spouse is a visual learner in the verbal world, and he's going to want to see what you're talking about. So I would get a big piece of paper, bigger than this one, and write this down. And so here would be some steps. First of all, you want to identify what the problem is, because a lot of times the NT spouse goes, well, the problem is this, and the ASD spouse goes, no, the problem is that. So the very first thing you have to do is agree on what the problem is. That's step number 1. Step number 2 might be to understand the interest in both parties. Okay, let's say for sake of discussion, you've identified the problem. The NT spouse is going to have a certain set of interests to resolve it, but his interests may be slightly elsewhere. So understand the interest in both parties. Then I would list some possible solutions. Put as many on paper as you can. Don't reject anything up front. These are just possible solutions. Some are going to be poor. Some are going to be okay. Some are going to be good. Some are going to be better. Some are going to be best, which would be step 4. So once you list the possible solutions, I want you to go back and rate those solutions in order of, you go poor, it's not necessarily a good option, but it's certainly worthy of being put on the list. Then maybe there's a good one and a better one and a best one. And this will just be your best guess for now because you're not sure. You have to actually do a trial. In other words, execute the method, whatever method you're going to have in trying to come up with a solution before you're actually going to know for sure whether it's good, better, best, or poor. So rate the solutions in order of poor, good, better, best. And then I would also rate these options with respect to which should be executed immediately, which should be executed sometime soon, and which ones can wait. Okay, so you're going to rate your possible solutions both with likelihood of a good outcome and also time. You're going to put a timeline to it. The sixth step might be to document the process. What worked, how did it turn out, what didn't work. So this document that you're going to put on a piece of paper with this problem-solving process is going to be a work in progress. It's going to need revisions because you're going to have more information perhaps next week than you have today. So you'll have to go back and revise. So here it is again. The two of you are undecided on something, and therefore nothing's getting done. First, be sure that both of you agree on what the problem is. Understand the interest in both parties. List as many possible solutions as possible. Rate those solutions in order of poor, good, better, best. Also, which ones need to be implemented can wait, which ones do we need to do soon, and which of these options need to be implemented immediately. And you want to document this process as it is going to be an ongoing process. What worked, what didn't, how did it turn out, why didn't it work, this did work, why do we think that worked? So long way around the bush, you're going to want to formalize this process. It can't be just a conversation. It needs to be a formal process on paper. And I think I have time for one more here. Let's see, what was this one? Oh, can never talk about anything without it turning into an argument. Okay. Then I would suggest doing a little bit of an analysis on, this is going to be another formalized process like we just talked about with the problem solving. I would do a formal process of investigating the argument in retrospect. In other words, after the argument has already happened and both parties are calm, the two of you can do a little conflict debriefing. You can do it together, or the NT wife can do her version, the ASD spouse can do his version. But let's do a little bit of investigation into the argument. And this is going to have to be after the fact. Describe the argument in question. In other words, what was said or done. Could you tell the conversation was escalating into an argument? If so, how? How intense was the argument? Let's come up with a scale of 1 to 5. 1 was there was some tension. 5 was it turned into a yelling match or somebody melted down or shut down. How long did the argument last? What was the likely function or intent of the argument? In other words, the argument serves some purpose. Either somebody's getting something out of the argument or they're trying to avoid something due to the argument. So what was the function or what were you either getting out of the argument or avoiding by having the argument? And what happened before the argument? In other words, what was the antecedent? What happened during the argument? And what happened after the argument? And again, I would write all of this down. And the reason that you want to formalize this process and write it down is because you're trying to look for patterns and themes in the way that the two of you argue so that you can prevent arguments in the future. Intervening in the middle of an argument? No. Doesn't work. You want to prevent the damn thing from happening in the first place. And the only way you're going to prevent is find patterns and themes. You're only going to find patterns and themes if you do this formalized process that I'm discussing. So you're looking for patterns. In other words, when is this argument likely to occur? When is this argument least likely to occur? Where is this argument most likely to occur? Where is this argument least likely to occur? How often does this argument on this particular topic occur? Because not all arguments are the same. There's going to be a particular area that the two of you will consistently argue more about than another one. So how often does the argument about problem one occur? And what conditions are most likely to precipitate or set off that argument? What other information can contribute to creating an effective argument prevention plan? In other words, under what conditions does the argument not occur? And what can be done to minimize the conflict the next time the argument occurs? That's called prevention. And with this, you're simply shooting for more wins than losses. You're never going to just never ever argue again unless you just never ever talk about anything. This assumes that you are going to discuss some things that might be risky for, ending badly. But so if you're able to have 51% of conversations without a huge argument, but the other 49%, it ended in an argument, that's a win. You're shooting for just simply more wins than losses. And so there you go. That would be a formalized process. And if you're dealing with an ASD spouse, you're going to have to formalize and you're going to have to document, and you need to be writing this stuff down so it's visible on paper. So we'll just call that investigating the argument in retrospect, so that you can look for patterns and themes, so that you can avoid those patterns in the future. So I hope that answered that question. That's all I have time for now. Sorry about that. So feel free to find me on ASDRelationshipSolutions.com for more information that can help ASD relationship solutions. That's a mouthful. ASDRelationshipSolutions.com. And you'll find me over there. Also, there should be, once I end this live stream, there should be a little join button underneath the video. And you can join there, and you'll get access to members only videos. And then you'll also be able to ask me questions whenever I do these live streams. Okay? So thank you. And there you go. All right, guys. Hey guys, this is Mark, and got some time to take a couple of questions here. And so here's one from an NT wife. Wanted to know how to help her ASD level 1 husband to be a better parent. Well, let me ask you a few questions. Have you micromanaged him in the past, and how did that go? Have you told him what he was doing wrong in the past, and how did that go? And with tasks that weren't emergent, have you wanted things done on your timeline rather than on his? How did that go? And have you wanted things done according to your standards rather than his? How did that go? So I'm asking you those questions because if you are parenting him too, then he's going to feel like a child, and he's not going to really feel confident in being a parent. So how can you help him be a better part of the kids' lives? Well, don't set him up for failure. So let's say, for example, that your son wants dad to throw a ball around on a Saturday morning, but you know that he's exhausted from a tough week at work. So you can kind of protect him in a way, your husband that is, from looking like a bad parent by explaining to your son that he needs to sleep a bit. And so in this way, you're kind of not necessarily making excuses for your husband, but you're kind of going to bat for him in a way. Another thing, you can talk talk him up in front of the kids, brag on him in front of the in-laws, in front of his friends. Again, if he knows you're out there bragging on him, he won't want to let you down, period. Another thing to consider is when you're both with the kids, let him be the star. Instead of piping in with directions and ideas for him and the children, let him guide the moment. So as you give your husband opportunities to prove himself, he'll feel more confident as a man and as a father. Another thing to consider is if your husband really feels like you believe that he's trying to be a good dad, he's more likely to live up to your expectations. On the other hand, if you think you have pegged him as a bad dad, he might feel defeated and unmotivated to even try. And I guess the other thing I would say is don't guilt trip him. If you do say things like, well, you should have done this, or why don't you do that? You never he might buck up and not make the time for the kids just to spite you. So he might not know, how to be a good dad, but you can help him and let him take care of the kids more on his own without micromanaging him. That's all I have to say about that. We could take a deeper dive on that at some other time. Here is a question. I'm just kind of summarizing. How can I help my husband to follow through with more of my expectations? Okay. Well, what I would suggest there is do a little bit of end of the day feedback. And so this is kind of a report card delivered to your, in this case, ASD level 1 husband in the form of a text, and I would suggest voice to text. So in this end of the day feedback, you're providing feedback regarding his contributions or lack thereof. Now, this is exclusively for these ASD spouse who is not sure what he's doing right and what's appreciated versus areas where improvement can be made. And he's open to your feedback. If those two things aren't in place, I wouldn't do this. So at the end of the day, you're going to text him regarding what he did right, along with a few words of appreciation, and also things that need to be worked on. Let's say things that need to be worked on rather than things that you did wrong or areas that you failed. So let's say, for example, let's say that he cooked dinner that night. So you could say, in your end of the day text to him, you did a great job with dinner. I appreciate you cooking a few times through the week. I like how you handled the kids when they were fussy about completing their homework. I thought it was very nice of you when you came home from work and you came straight to me and said, how was my day? So you're saying all the positive things that may have happened first, then you're going to follow it up with some recommendations for improvement. The sink needs a little work. We need to remember to lock the back door before we go to bed too. So in this way, you're starting with the positives, and you want to shoot for no less than 50% positive feedback and no more than 50% recommendations for improvement. I would also avoid using the term you, Y-O-U. Instead, use phrases. So instead of saying, well, you did this or you didn't do that, I would just say, it would be helpful if this happened, or such and such could use a little work. So in summary, end of the day feedback, you're going to text him the 1 or 2, maybe 3 things that you appreciate that he did right. And then you follow that up with a few areas of things that need to be worked on. So that would be a way to get more compliance with him regarding meeting some of your expectations. Let's see. Have another question here about how can I make peace with the fact that I have to do all the relationship work? I don't want you doing all the relationship work, let alone make peace with it. So I would say if you feel like you're doing all the relationship work for you, this was a question from an NT wife, less work is better, okay? If you feel that you're doing all the relationship work, maybe it's time to think in terms of less is better. So you can think of effort involving doing or avoiding. So on one end, you're working on doing something, but on the other end, you're working on avoiding something. So working on something takes a lot of time and energy. I'm recommending that you back off on that. Avoiding something does require discipline, but not much time or effort. So think of it like this. We have two categories of poor doing. Two categories of poor doing. There's doing that yields no positive result. And then there's also poor doing that actually makes a bad problem worse. So with this idea in mind, you're trying to avoid the negatives. So rather than you're trying to avoid the negatives rather than exert some course of action, lecturing, arguing, pleading, negotiating, fixing, reasoning with, etc. So what I would say to do is, kind of as an assignment, list those things that you've been doing or saying that yield no positive result or make a bad problem worse. And then from that list, pick those things that you're willing to avoid doing or saying. I'm not saying, well, just give up and never do anything, but I'm saying pick your battles carefully. And if you feel like you're doing all the relationship work, that means you probably have been doing all the relationship work, which means that he doesn't feel like he has to do anything because the good old wife will take care of it. So when you start backing off some, it's more likely that he will start getting up to bat and doing more on his end, at least more so than he is now. So I think with those three, we'll stop. And thank you for your questions. There'll be a link below this video if you want to join and get access to members-only videos and be able to ask questions on these live chats. Okay, we'll call that a quit for now. Thanks, guys. I wanted to do a little quickie live video here because I keep getting a lot of questions about pathological demand avoidance. That's technically not something that's in the Diagnostic and Statistic Manual of Mental Disorders, but it's a thing, kind of like Cassandra syndrome. It's not in the DSM-5, but it's still a thing, still exists. And so, as many of you know, and by the way, if you can't hear me, let me know in the chat. As many of you know, pathological demand avoidance is a term to use to describe a profile of autism where the person actively avoids everyday demands and expectations to sometimes an extreme extent. That could include avoiding tasks, social interactions, everyday routines, and so on. So again, even though it's not officially recognized as a separate diagnosis in the DSM-5, it is recognized in the National Autistic Society's Autism Spectrum Disorders, which is, I think it's called a Guide to Good Practice. So there's several traits that go with, I'm just going to call it PDA, pathological demand avoidance. Some traits of that would be high levels of anxiety, extreme need for control, difficulty with social communication. There's some obsessive behavior that comes with that. And of course, resisting and avoiding ordinary demands. An inability to cope with unexpected changes. Exhibiting passive resistance. Exhibiting superficial social skills. Difficulty with social imagination. And having some mood swings and impulsivity. And as I'm rattling off these traits, most of you are going, well, those sound like traits of ASD level 1, 2. So there is a huge crossover between ASD and PDA. So it makes sense to me why some NTYs that I run into want to say, well, he has pathological demand avoidance. Well, 75% of the traits of PDA are also ASD. So let's don't play diagnostician, okay? So let's look at some of these traits a little deeper. So I said anxiety, right? So what are some of the causes of anxiety? Well, chronic stress due to work, school, marriage problems, traumatic experiences, abuse, accidents, genetic factors, medications. So, lack of sleep, poor nutrition, substance abuse, all of these things contribute to anxiety. So there's a host of reasons why somebody is anxious. And just because they have high anxiety doesn't necessarily mean they have ASD or PDA, but high anxiety does come with ASD and PDA. So there's a huge crossover between PDA and ASD. And that's kind of the purpose of this video, to make the distinction between the two. We're specifically looking at PDA today. I said another trait of PDA is that they have a high extreme need for control. And there's many reasons for that. I'm not making this. If somebody has a high need to control circumstances, it could be from past experiences where they felt powerless or out of control, leading them to overcompensate in their current relationships and situations, or it could be driven by a fear of uncertainty and the unknown. And it could also be the result of an overwhelming desire for safety and security. And I've often said that people with ASD live a life of unpredictability. If he or she has ASD, they're going to have some mind emotions blindness, some executive function deficits, and some anxiety. We could also throw in weak central coherence, problems with prediction, sensory sensitivities. All of these things create a bunch of unpredictability for that individual. What are they going to do if they feel like there's so much unpredictability 24/7? They're going to try to create as much predictability as possible. What's that going to look like? They're going to come off as very rigid, stubborn. They're going to come off as very rigid, stubborn. They're going to hate to have their routine jacked with. They thrive on structure, and they don't like change, especially surprise change. So people with ASD do have a strong need for safety and security, only because they live in a world of unpredictability. Another trait that I had mentioned was problems with social communication, and that happens for a bunch of reasons. If he or she has ASD level 1, they're going to be low in social and emotional intelligence, although they're going to be high in general IQ and high in logical intelligence. I'm not calling them dumb. Most of them are smarter than me. But they're going to be lacking in the social skills and emotional skills department. And that means they're going to have trouble interpreting social cues. They're going to have difficulty initiating and maintaining conversations. They're going to have difficulty with emotional reciprocity. So identifying the root cause of social communication problems is a big deal, because it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all. There's numerous reasons for that. The primary one being low social and emotional intelligence. That comes with ASD level 1. In fact, I've often said that ASD is a disorder such that the person's social and emotional brain is underdeveloped, which means that their emotional age is much, much younger than their chronological age. I had mentioned obsessive behavior. That can happen for a bunch of reasons. So that's another trait of PDA, exhibiting excessive behaviors, obsessive behaviors. That could be the result of obsessive compulsive disorder, anxiety disorder, depression, bunch of reasons why that happens. Some people may develop obsessive behavior as a way to cope with stress and trauma, and also certain personality traits such as perfectionism may contribute to obsessive behavior and even OCD. People on the autism spectrum tend to be very perfectionistic about a small number of things, but if they don't have all their ducks in a row, they may end up procrastinating because they want it done perfectly, and if they don't feel like they're prepared to do it perfectly, they'll procrastinate, and in some cases never get it done. I mentioned that they avoid ordinary demands that neurotypicals would not even think twice about following through with. So there's a bunch of reasons for that. One common reason is they feel overwhelmed or stressed, and this is one other thing on their plate, and it's just too much for them to handle because they're already high anxiety, right? They already have their own agenda planned out, right? They've already have their schedule set up for the day, and you want to throw an extra thing in. Sometimes it's just enough to crack their brain. In some cases, people also avoid ordinary demands because they feel unmotivated. or disengaged. It's like, I don't really see any need to do that. It doesn't even fall within my radar. They just don't see any value in completing those tasks. And I know that piece right there takes the shit out of a lot of NTYs. And also, some people may avoid ordinary demands because they just lack the confidence in their ability to complete a thing, or they feel fear failure. Okay. Let's see. One of the other traits I had mentioned was they don't like, another trait of PA, but also ASD, is they don't like unexpected changes. It disrupts their sense of normalcy. It disrupts their routine. It disrupts their sense of being able to control circumstances. It basically puts a crack in their pre-planned structure. So it could be a sudden job loss, a health problem, a major life event. So unexpected changes are difficult for people with PDA and ASD because it raises their anxiety. And anxiety, by the way, if you want a definition of that, it's I'm afraid of something and I'm not really sure what it is. Okay? We probably should make the distinction between fear and anxiety. Fear is I'm afraid of something and I know what it is. I got to have a root canal tomorrow or something. Anxiety is I'm afraid of something and I can't quite put my finger on it. We're back to the concept of unpredictability again now. So one of the main reasons why unexpected changes can be so challenging for people on the spectrum is that it requires them to adapt to a new circumstance quickly. And people with ASD are slow processors. They don't adapt to new things that pop up quickly. Okay? So let's see. Another thing that I mentioned was they can exhibit passive resistance. And this can happen because they feel powerless to effect change through a more assertive means, or they may fear the potential consequences of more direct action. In other words, they may favor being passive. In other cases, they may be making a deliberate choice to resist in a more subtle or indirect way to avoid confrontation, right? How many times has that happened in your neurodiverse marriage? Another one I mentioned is some of them PA. Not so much with people with ASD will exhibit superficial social skills. So there's several reasons for that. One of the reasons might be that they lack empathy, which causes them to kind of be out of touch with other people's needs and emotions. Another reason to exhibit superficial social skills would be they're more focused on personal goals than building connections with others. And then we're back to the concept of hyper-focusing on a special interest for extended periods of time there. And some people that exhibit superficial social skills simply suffer with social anxiety or fear of rejection, which leads them to kind of put up a facade of confidence and charm, which I know you want to call that masking. Okay, fine. The other trait of PDA is, what did we say? Social imagination, struggling with social imagination. And this comes with the package with ASD and also ADHD. So let's see, I think we mentioned mood swings and we also mentioned impulsivity. So mood swings, that can be hormonal, certain medications, substance abuse, anxiety, depression, bipolar, personality disorders, thyroid problems, neurological disorder. So there's a bunch of reasons for mood swings. And having wild mood swings is definitely a trait of PDA. We also said impulsivity was one. And so that's could be the factors there could be ADHD, bipolar, substance abuse, borderline personality, antisocial personality. So impulsivity can be a learned behavior too. It can be a coping mechanism too, coping mechanism for stress. So suffice it to say that there is a huge overlap between pathological demand avoidance and autism spectrum disorder, but they're two different things. And sometimes NT's spouses want to label it PDA, like he's purposely being defiant and oppositional. No, there's a bunch of reasons behind the curtain why that's going on. Bunch of reasons why your ASD spouse is avoiding ordinary demands. And it's usually the case, and in summary here, that he feels overwhelmed and anxious when faced with certain expectations or tasks that fall outside of his special interests or that he was surprised with, that makes him difficult for him to deal with yet another thing thrown on his plate. He probably does, or she has a strong need for control and autonomy. I've often said people on the spectrum are very independent. Many of them are solo players who just happen to be married. And so sometimes they resist demands purely to assert their independence. So, but I think the main reason, based on working with these individuals for, I've lost track of the years, 10, 12, 15, they avoid demands not because they're purposely trying to be oppositional or passive aggressive. It's a way to deal with their anxiety or to deal with them not having extra anxiety. So if I had to summarize this thing in one sentence, it would be this: they avoid extra demands because their head is already decided on the day's agenda, and they have one special interest that they can hyper-focus on for extended periods of time. And so when you come along as the NT spouse with an ordinary demand or request, and I know you think, well, that's not much. Well, if you can see that in his mind, his plate's already full, and he doesn't want unpredictability, he's not too interested in stuff that falls outside of his special interest, then it starts to make sense. I'm not trying to justify it. I'm not saying it's good, bad, right, or wrong. I'm just trying to shed some light on it so you'll know what's going on behind the curtain with this PDA business. So I probably over-explained it at this point. Hey guys, this is Mark. I didn't give you a heads up that I was going to go live because I didn't realize that I was going to have time to do that, but I do. I do have about 15 minutes, and I'm going to do more live videos because I keep getting requests for that. And so I will be doing more live videos, but this is going to be a fairly short one today. And I got a question from, this is a husband with ASD, and he's basically asking, how can I discuss things with my NT wife without losing my shit? And so I'm guessing that he's having a hard time problem solving relationship difficulties with his NT wife without he does some version of meltdown or shutdown or false agreement, which would be where he might say, yeah, I'll do it. Yeah, sure. Yeah, okay. Yeah, you're right. Just hurry up and end the conversation. Or maybe he's running into a situation where I just call it the shutdown, where his brain literally short circuits. So there's really four things that happen. If you, let's say you are the ASD spouse, you have a hard time discussing relationship problems with your NT spouse. Usually the outcome is four things: some version of a meltdown, which is your anxiety is like super high and you're having a hard time regulating your emotions. There's the shutdown, which is basically your attempt to avoid a meltdown. That's where you just go away because you don't even want to talk. Then there is, so that's, meltdown is fight, shutdown is flight, but then there's two versions of freeze. One is false agreement, where you just agree and go along just to hurry up and then get the conversation over with, although in some cases you're willing to follow through, but the main goal is just get it over with. And then there is the short circuit, where you are literally in some version of fight or flight, and your brain's just not functioning very well. Your prefrontal cortex has kind of shut down. Your amygdala is now flooding your body with cortisol and adrenaline. The hindbrain is fully engaged. And so in those cases, you can only will yourself to maybe just listen to 75% of what she's saying. And then of that 75%, you're probably only going to be able to remember 50%. And of that 50%, you're only going to retain 25%, making these numbers up, but it's pretty close. And of that 25%, you may only follow through with 5% of what she's asking you to do. So we have fight, which is the meltdown, flight, shutdown. We have freeze, which would be false agreement and short circuiting. So to avoid all of that, you would want to request that she do a few things. Some very common things that I ran into is she will want to talk right now because it's something very important to her, and she will interrupt you in the middle of you doing something that's important to you. And so that is often a stumbling block to communication. So ask your NT wife, you say, and here's a script for you, unless it's emergent, please give me a heads up that you need to talk about something that may turn out to be a difficult topic where we might be at risk of me doing a shutdown, meltdown, or false agreement. So say, just give me a heads up. It's not going to eliminate my anxiety, but it'll reduce it because I'm not going to be interrupted. Another thing you can ask her to do, if you're really serious about establishing communication without you doing your meltdown or shutdown, you can ask her to keep the conversations relatively short. I'm not faulting the NTYs, but sometimes they go on 30, 45, 90 minutes. And to the NTYs listening to this, you lost him way back at the 10-minute mark. If his anxiety is up and you go over 10 minutes roughly, you're going to get very little return on your investment of time and energy trying to get your message across to him because you lost him. Okay, so another thing you can do as the autistic spouse, since your NT spouse is very intuitive and socially and emotionally smart, sometimes she speaks in neurotypical, high intuitive language that comes off to you as very vague. If you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some mind blindness, some emotions blindness, some executive function deficits, and anxiety. And if she's very, she can talk to her girlfriends, and they're very intuitive, and she can say things, and they will totally get it. She could say that same thing to you, the ASD husband in this case, and a lot of that was seen very vague. So ask her to be very concrete. Just be very specific. Don't expect me to read your mind, read your heart, and to be as intuitive as you. Another thing you can ask your NT wife to do, if you're really serious about establishing communication, is to ask her not to come at you when she's already upset. Now, I know sometimes, we're only human. Sometimes she's going to want to talk right now and have an emotional vomit in your lap, and she's pissed right now and she's going to talk right now. Okay, sometimes that's going to happen. But it would be the thing to do to ask her that, the other 90% of the time when you're mad, would you do me a favor and calm down before you want to try to talk to me? Because I'll pick up on your being angry. I will short circuit, and now I will not be able to listen, understand, or retain because I'm paying more attention to your voice inflection and your angry face than the words coming out of your mouth. If you have ASD level 1, you're going to have some some level of alexithymia, which is emotions blindness. So another thing you could do if you really want to try to establish communication with your NT wife, ask her, can we speak in terms of needs? Will you just tell me what you need instead of in terms of feelings? Because if you say, well, I feel this way about such and such, and you expect me to know what I'm supposed to do based on how you feel, I'm probably not going to get it. So ask her to speak in terms of needs rather than feelings. Another thing that's a huge trigger for, in this case, husbands with ASD, is when the NT wife brings up the past that you can't fix now. Now, sometimes she's just going to have an emotional vomit. She's going to have to bring up the past because she still hasn't quite gotten over it, and she's just going to have to vent. So sometimes that's just going to happen. But the other 90% of the time, you can ask her, if it's something that I can fix now, currently, that was a past issue, that's fair game, bring it up. If it's something that there's no way we can rewind the clock and I go back and fix it now, then ask her, just please don't bring it up unless you just have to vent, in which case I'll try to listen. there's not going to get any problem solving done in that case, though. I guess the only other thing I would say to the guy that asked this question is, I'm not faulting the NT wife, but a lot of times she will bring up multiple topics in one conversation, and you will not do well with that. And so also she's very intuitive, and she'll bring up problem 1A, 1B, 1C, and 1D, and she thinks it's all one problem. But to the ASD mind, who has some executive function deficits, that's 4 different problems. So that the NT wives listening, don't bring up problem 1A, B, C, and D, because that's going to seem like 4 things. His brain's going to crack around problem 2, and you lose again. So to the ASD husbands in here, ask your wife, can we stay to one topic in one conversation so that I don't get lost? Okay? So there you go. We've talked about interruptions, conversations that run on. She's vague. She wants to talk while she's upset. She wants to bring up the unfixable past. And she brings up too many topics, which you may view as data dumping, and you can't keep up with it. Okay? She's a multitasker in the emotional and social sense. You are not. So those are 7 things that you can do as an autistic husband to establish communication without doing meltdown, shutdown, false agreement, or your brain just short circuits. So I wish I had more time. There are some comments over here. My husband thinks everything, Megs says, my husband thinks everything is a confrontation. But that's because he's high anxiety. And it's almost excruciatingly impossible for him to talk about relationship difficulties, because he views that as there's something wrong with me, there's something wrong with us, you're being parental, you're talking down to me, you're mad at me, you're upset with me. His self-esteem is already in the toilet before he met you. And so when you even say a neutral thing to him, he will run the risk of downloading that as criticism. So that's why any conversations about resolving some relationship issues is super difficult. And that's why I'm doing this video. So that if the guys watching this, ASD spouses, watch this video, maybe you won't view conversations with your NT wife as confrontation. Let's see. My Asperger's journey says, I'm ASD and I'm the one that brings up the unfixable past. Okay. Well, I gave, for all intents and purposes, I told you a little bit ago that your NT wife may bring up the unfixable past, because sometimes she just needs to vent. And you would want her to vent. You don't want her to bottle that stuff up, because the longer she bottles it up, the more that explosion is going to crack your brain. So sometimes you just have to vent. And to the NT wives watching that bring up the unfixable past because they just need to vent, and to the ASD spouses that do the same thing, you don't beat up on yourself and I shouldn't have did that. No, you just go, okay, well, everybody has a weak moment. Everybody deserves to have a bad day, and everybody deserves to vent every once in a while. So when the other person is in a one down position because they need to vent and they're hurting inside, it would be best for the other spouse to go, okay, you know what? I'm going to have to be the strong one in this moment, because this person is really hurt and they need to vent, and I'm just going to sit here and take it. I know that sounds hard. You're extending some grace and mercy and compassion in that moment. Why would you want to do that? Because someday it's going to be all the other way around. Someday you're going to need to vent, and you would want her to sit there and listen with a very compassionate, graceful, merciful listening ear, right? Catherine said, yes, self-esteem troubled for a lifetime and not being understood. Yeah, a lot of these guys couldn't fit in from day one, labeled problem children by parents, labeled problem students by teachers, labeled as odd by their peers. Many of them were ostracized, bullied, teased, couldn't quite fit in, and a lot of them just gave up. Okay, I'm no good at this social game. I'll just engage in non-social tasks and activities, and I'll just tend to myself and isolate, and I'll entertain myself. And then they grow up as an adult, and they're still doing that same thing. And so when you're married to an autistic spouse and you feel like he's not a team player, he's a solo player who just happens to be married, he learned to go solo way back as a child. Everybody deserves to have a bad day. That's right, Catherine. I got a couple more minutes here. Megs, I would like to hear what I have to say about men who were abused as a child. Most of them were on the receiving end of some kind of abuse. So I would say 90% plus were abused. Now, there's going to be different levels of severity. Some were physically abused. So I wouldn't have time to get into that one. The conversation we would have about that would be the same conversation that you would have about any child that was physically abused. But most ASD men were on the receiving end of some version of emotional abuse. And even if we don't want to use a strong word like emotional abuse, we could use something a little muted. They were always on the receiving end of disapproval from parents, teachers, peers. Then they become an adult, get married to the NT wife. Things go well for a while. He starts to distance himself. Then the NT wife now, her heart's in the right place. She's wanting to keep the marriage together. But now he views this, here's yet another person. I'm on the receiving end of disapproval. So he's been on the receiving end of disapproval to one degree or another his entire life. That's significantly less problematic than physical abuse. Okay. I will go longer next time. And I'll try to give you a heads up too, because I'm just a surprise. I'm going live. So I will be doing more live videos, I promise. And also give you a heads up when it's going to happen. So I think we'll stop for now. So I wanted to answer that question from the guy, how can I discuss difficult topics without losing my shit is basically what he was asking. And so hopefully the ideas that I gave you will facilitate communication so that you're willing to engage. You're not going to shut down or melt down. You're willing to listen. So the only other thing I would say to the men out there with autism is when you're discussing things with your wife, listen to understand rather than to mount a defense. Go into the discussion thinking, okay, I'm going to do my best to not offer my opinion about her opinion, not to make her wrong, not to view her message delivery as she's trying to be critical. I'm going to listen to understand. And so active listening is I'm going to stop what I'm doing. I'm going to look in her direction. I'm going to nod while she's talking. And periodically, you're going to paraphrase back what she said. So honey, what I hear you saying is such and such. If she goes, no, that's not what I mean. Okay, well, then you go. You can say, would you mind repeating it? Slightly different wordage, because I want to get it. She could repeat it. And you go, okay, so what I hear you saying is da-da-da-da-da. She'll go, yes, that's what I mean. Okay, so that proves understanding. You paraphrase back using your words and she says, yes, that's what I'm talking about. Then that proves understanding. So now you have listened. You were present during the conversation. You paraphrase back, which proves understanding. If you want to go an extra mile, you could validate and go, okay, you know what? I respect the fact that that's your truth. I hear you. I understand you because you said my paraphrase was right. And I respect the fact that that's your opinion. So that's way different than listening to get ready to say what you're going to say. I'm listening to understand. I'm turning it into an experiment. I'm turning it into a project. The project being, I want to listen to understand, even in spite of the fact that some of the things he's saying might trigger me. Okay? So that's probably I probably over answered that question, but anyway, it's okay. So we'll end this now. And again, I promise I'll do more lives and I'll give you a heads up that we're doing. And thank you for the comments over there. Okay, hey guys, this is Mark. And another quickie live video here. And I wanted to briefly talk about the 9 temperaments of ASD. This is what I run into most often in counseling individuals and couples, the neurodiverse couple. And this is not to say that neurotypicals don't have some of these traits as well. And by the way, even though I'm going to talk about these different temperaments, this is not a put down or an insult. This is not trying to make you have to be a bad person or whatever. Of course not. It is a way to suggest that you may want to look at yourself and maybe challenge yourself to deal with some of the issues that you may or may not want to improve upon. So, the 9 temperaments of ASD level 1 as I see them. So we have the distruster, the disconnector, the magical thinker. I'm making these terms up, by the way. The mood swinger, the I know better than you thinker, the mind blind individual, the avoider, the clinger, and the obsessor. So these are my terms. I know they may be kind of odd terms. So let's look at the distruster, the distruster. This individual believes that his spouse or her spouse is trying to do harm in some way, doubts the loyalty of the spouse, has a habit of holding grudges, hesitates to confide in the spouse for fear that the spouse will use that information against them, lacks trust and is suspicious of the spouse and the reasons for the spouse's actions. We're talking about the neurotypical spouse's actions. Often suspects that the neurotypical spouse or sexual partner is unfaithful with no reason to feel that way, and takes innocent remarks or situations that are not threatening as personal insults or attacks. Okay, does that sound like you? The disconnector, this is the second one. This person almost always chooses to be alone. He or she appears to be cold to or not interested in his spouse. This individual cannot pick up on typical social cues, does not take pleasure in most activities outside of his special interest, has little to no interest in having sex, and is limited in how emotions are expressed. Okay, the third one is I'm just going to call him the magical thinker. This individual has magical thinking, which is the belief that his or her thoughts can affect events. Also, he or she believes that other people are thinking the same thing that they are. This individual will tend to get lost in his inner world a lot, and he may believe that some casual incidents or events have hidden messages. Okay, next, the mood swinger. This person has a strong fear of being alone or abandoned. This person has ongoing feelings of emptiness. This individual has up and down moods, often due to stress when interacting with his or her spouse. This individual is often very angry and sees self as being unable or weak. Okay? Next, the I know better than you thinker. This individual does not understand the needs and feelings of the spouse, expects constant praise, wants to be admired, expects favors and advantages without a good reason, feels superior and brags about it, has beliefs about being special and more important than the spouse, can take advantage of the spouse, and tends to stretch the truth about achievements or talents. Okay? I know this sounds very stereotyping. It's not meant to be stereotyping. It is made for you to think about some areas of challenge that you may want to look at. The mind-blind person is next. This person has little concern for the needs or feelings of the spouse, can be aggressive, has little concern for personal safety or the safety of children or spouse, behaves impulsively, is often reckless, and has little regret on how his or her behavior negatively affects others. Next, the avoider. And by the way, I'm just making these terms up because they kind of encapsulate the traits associated with the particular temperament. So the avoider does not feel good enough, does not like to take part in activities that include the spouse, does not like to try new activities, does not like meeting new people, fears disapproval, can be extremely shy in social situations, is often isolated, and is very sensitive to criticism or rejection. Okay, next is the clinger. The clinger. This individual finds it hard to start or do projects due to lack of self-confidence. This person can be submissive towards his or her neurotypical spouse. Person lacks confidence in abilities, needs a lot of advice and comforting from spouse to make even small decisions, relies on the spouse too much, feels the need to be taken care of. And again, I'm not saying that neurotypicals don't have some of these traits. They certainly do, but we're talking about the person with ASD right now. And the last one I'm calling the obsessor. This individual can't finish a project because reaching perfection is not possible. He can't throw away broken or worthless objects, focuses too much on details, orderliness, and rules. He holds very tight control over budgeting and spending money. He may ignore family and enjoyable activities because of too much focus on work or a particular project. He can be very rigid and stubborn, needs to be in control of others and family members, tasks, situations, and so on. Thinks everything needs to be perfect and gets upset when perfection is not achieved. So again, there's, as I have experienced working with people on the spectrum and their spouses, this is a very general description of the temperaments that I've witnessed. The distruster, the disconnector, the magical thinker, the mood swinger, the I know better than you thinker, the mind-blind individual, the avoider, the clinger, and the obsessor. I don't mean to be sarcastic or stereotyping, but I do want to describe some of the traits of these particular temperaments with the hope that you will have the confidence to come to the conclusion that, yeah, maybe, you know what, I have probably some of these traits in this particular category, and I think I could use a little improvement there. So it's just purely for your own edification, and hopefully will result in your willingness to maybe take a look at some areas of improvement. Okay, that's it, guys. Thanks for watching, and if you have any questions, feel free to put it in the comments below.